Well, everyone, it's been a long day. Hopefully we've learned a lot, but now you have the opportunity to ask questions. You've heard the presentations, and hopefully that sparked some new thoughts and new realizations. So I'd like to lay a few ground rules out for this event here that when you ask a question, please stand up, state your name, your affiliation, and make your question rather short, right to the point. And I will ask the same of our presenters, at least as far as your response. Make it right to the point and keep it short. That way we have the opportunity to get more questions answered, and everyone gets a chance to say what they have to say. That way we're not monopolizing. We only have an hour, but it'll fly right by, I'm sure. I have some canned questions, and I prefer that you ask your questions because that's much more meaningful to the audience. So would anyone like to start it, or should I prime the pump here with my first question? Please stand up.
Hi, my name is John Foley. I'm a student at Emerson College. Okay. My question is, in the ATSC bootstrap signal for 3.0, how much space is there for user bits? Is there any space for broadcasters to add their own user bits?
Who's our 3.0 expert here?
Carl, we're going to nominate you.
No, I know the RF layer, not the actual payload layer. I'm sorry. Repeat the question, please.
Is there any space for user bits in the ATSC 3.0 signal?
No, I don't know.
I would suggest send an email to Del Parks. He'll
Yeah.
send you everything you need to know about it.
Yes.
Honestly, he's the expert
That's
on.
Sinclair.
Yep.
Sinclair broadcasting.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah.
You stumped the panel expert.
First question.
Well, the answer is probably there's a lot.
Yeah.
No, in the bootstrap signal specifically. Thank you.
I think it would be safe to say there probably is because there's a lot of future capability that was designed into it. Anyone else? Stump the stars. Okay, let me ask a question. As far as the reality of what we're talking about here all day, are there any lessons learned that you'd like to share with our group here so they don't repeat the same mistakes? Because there's a lot of talk about it, but how much is actually being implemented? Or any lessons learned or any benchmark that we should be looking at?
I have one. Recently, of a broadcaster attempting IP. I do think that at this stage, especially with the legacy hardware that exists, that it does make sense to take advantage of SDI as well as IP. That's a way that you can ensure that not only do you have benchmarks, but you have the ability to truly utilize solutions that you're very, very familiar with. And I'll just keep that very short as an answer. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to add something to that?
In the case of routing switchers, which several of us make routing switchers, take a look at what your sources and destinations are today. Do you need to go into IP or not? Today, IP is more expensive just because the physical connector is more expensive than the BNC. That'll change very quickly over time, but take a look at what your sources and destinations are. Many or most of the routing switchers from all manufacturers support both baseband and IP inputs and outputs, whether they actually switch in a fabric or an IP domain or in a baseband crosspoint domain. Take a look at what you need and determine how long you're looking at that product and what your sources and destinations are.
Well, you have to consider also applications. Right now there are 5 gigantic greenfield projects that then they need those buildings done yesterday. And they are about to select a system that exists today with IP completely because they cannot afford to wire the building with anything but IP. That's one. Also trucks, 4K IP trucks, they are already being made today, and 8K trucks IP. Why? Because you cannot use 4 or 32 coaxial cables. The truck is impossible. It will be economically impossible to do it. Then those 2 milestones to date are forcing implementations today on IP, proprietary, easily to adapt to other standards in the future, but today this is about business.
Can we share any actual Go ahead. You have a question. Please state your name and your affiliation and your question, please.
Jim Richer, independent producer, I guess you'd say. Thank you. You want me to? You got it. This is for Hugo or anybody else. So if you wanted to move into high dynamic range production, can you even do it at this stage, or is everything so fluid that it doesn't really make sense to do a final master? I mean, you were talking about master, shooting in RAW, shooting in S-Log, and then maybe later producing a master. But how defined is it at this stage?
It's done. The Olympics are going to be shot in HDR. Character generators, mixing, legacy material, clips from the past, everything has to be orchestrated to be ready in 90 days.
And this assumes that TVs will be
There is an SDR output, there is an HD that somebody is paying for this. That would be nice. And there will be a 4K SDR, 4K HDR, maybe for the vaults, maybe for 2,000 set-top box somewhere. But the event is happening.
But it's not going to get to TVs for a while.
Exactly.
There are TVs out there that say that they're HDR, but there's no way of getting anything to them.
Next question, please.
I'm John Bishop. I'm a consultant and sales agent for high-end residential entertainment and cinema systems. So I'm interested in the creative movie side of things. So a director is dealing with, his lens and wants to know how it's going to look at the exhibition end, lens to lens. And ultimately at the consumer level, what is that art going to look like in the home? It could be on a TV or it could be in a real high-end cinema environment created in the home, which is my area. A lot of pixels came to market, and we had to convert a lot of content from 1080p to 4K. It didn't really matter much on a TV, but when the images get real big in the cinema, those processes matter, and there are some issues there. Now I see a simple thing, high dynamic range, in terms of it's already done. But I heard about metadata on a frame-by-frame basis. I heard about new processes with different curves in and out. How do we, at the consumer end, know when it's right? How do we calibrate these displays, and how do we know when any individual thing is right? Rec. 709 is like an encode decode. We sort of know it got to the Blu-ray disc, want to be, a 30-foot Lambert image in a space, however they graded it, and we could test and confirm performance levels. How are we going to do this in this new world? What tools are we going to get?
Okay. Anything that is physical media, such as ultra high definition Blu-ray or streaming, right now is following the PQ or 2084 process. And with that, it associates static metadata. Okay. The static metadata is part of the HDR10 transmission. However, there is nobody that can force a TV manufacturer to obey that metadata. And the reason why, and I found recently, is if that metadata is incorrectly calculated, and the TV set is, let me finish, and the TV set is a slave to that metadata, the content is gonna be bad. And then the end user is gonna say, well, who is here to blame? The TV manufacturer. Return the TV set back to Best Buy. Then a lot of the consumer TV manufacturers are not paying attention to 2086. Sony doesn't. We do frame-by-frame analysis in our TVs to calculate maximum brightness, average brightness, and we do tone map. It's our screen.
Are there testing tools now with that metadata connected to it where the performance of the Sony can be confirmed?
This is 2016. When did you?
I'm not sure I've heard about it yet.
Okay. I panned my first HDTV camera. I panned my first HDTV camera in 1973. You're talking about Rec. 709 stuff that you can confirm. It's a long time since 1973. We are in the HDR phase, roughly where HD was in 1973.
So what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is we are not standard. We don't have stuff that's out there. Remember at NAB in 2010, 2011, when everyone had to go 3D? Well, now we don't. Remember in 1983, 1984, where the big battle. It's possible, or it'll be totally set up for you.
It's possible, yeah.
Well, one thing you also have to keep in mind is that not all TV manufacturers support all the HDR formats. So there's Dolby Vision out there, but to my knowledge, only 3 manufacturers support it: TCL, LG for their OLEDs, and Vizio. Samsung has their own HDR format, which they actually have submitted to SMPTE, dynamic tone mapping. They showed it at NAB. Technicolor and Philips have their format. There's the HLG format. Not all the manufacturers support all the formats. So we have a lot of different ways that we can recognize and reproduce an HDR signal, but not everybody's on the same page. Because remember what I said earlier, stay, wait. I would just wait. I mean, Mark's absolutely right. This is still, we're all in the wagons. It's the great Oklahoma land rush, and they haven't fired the gun yet. And some people are sneaking out there already and staking their claims. So I would not want to see anybody buy a 4K TV, even though I just told you the differential, the delta is so small now that people are upgrading to it. I would not want to see them buy it and then come back 6 months later and say, I didn't know about this HDR thing. I saw it, looks great, my TV can't do HDR. I'm ticked off because they're going to hunt me down and I'm going to pay the price for it. So that's why I'm saying be patient. There's still a lot of stuff to be worked out. At the production end, as Hugo said, it's all, they're building the plane while they're flying it too, believe me. But it's going to happen. I think didn't AT&T do something with DirecTV? They did same thing. Did another golf match in HDR. So it's kind of like when HDTV broadcast first started. We all went to the one guy's house that actually could receive it and watch it. We're sort of at that same point. So it's going to take a few years to mature. But a more uniform support among the TV manufacturers of the different standards would help. And there's some political issues involved there too. It's not likely that Samsung will want to license Dolby Vision. There are reasons for that. I don't want to go into it. So you may not see it on a Samsung TV. They may want to push their version of HDR because they think it's just as good. So, no, I know it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but that's just where things are right now.
Some questions?
Yes, sir. Over there. Right behind you.
Pete Nelson, I do audio video consulting and calibration, and I'm going to pick up on John. It is the Wild West out there. One of the big concerns that I have is just to John's point, and it's really particular with projection systems in the home, they are much more light output limited than even current TVs that don't have HDR capability. Particularly if you look at, for instance, the 2016 Sony. So my question is, and Joe Kane has actually proposed this, doing SDR 10-bit in 4K. Now I know with the Blu-ray standards, the UHD standards, that there's a base layer that's at 1080. But would it be possible to do SDR 10-bit and keep the 4K? Because we need the extra bits for the bigger screens. But if you got a projector that's, straining to hit 30-foot Lamberts, TQ curve is just not going to cut it. So what do we do? Is that possible? Can you do that?
You can do anything that somebody's going to pay for. How much will you pay for 4K 10-bit SDR? You can buy the Arte converter from HDR to SDR from him for probably less than you're going to pay for the rest of it.
Can you extract the 10-bit signal, the 10-bit content from an Ultra HD piece of content that's available today and deliver that in 10 bits, not to a 4K display, but to a 1080p display that's a 10-bit capable display? Is there a way to extract that?
It's not a question of extraction. As I tried to point out earlier, you can do any amount of dynamic range in any number of bits. Each additional bit just gives you 6 dB more signal to noise ratio. It's not a question of contouring if you do the engineering correctly. Almost no one in the video industry is doing the engineering correctly. In the audio industry, they are. When CDs first came out, there were people complaining about how terrible CDs sounded compared to their vinyl records. You don't hear that anymore because the audio industry has learned how to deal with noise. The video industry, Sam came up with dynamic rounding, which was a way of dealing with that, and practically no one else has been dealing with that.
But now we have 10-bit video content. We can't deliver
But
it.
10 bits doesn't mean anything. 10 bits just means it's another 12 dB of signal to noise ratio. It doesn't mean that you're not going to see contouring on a big screen. And 8 bits doesn't mean you are going to see contouring on a big screen.
I don't know if you have seen a 4K disc. 4K disc is a package. It has 2 discs. There is a 4K movie that has the HDR, and there is a Blu-ray 1080, 24 frames. Therefore, the DVD disc that we used to have is gone. Your backward compatible for your standard 1080 world is the Blu-ray that comes here. And it has very big letters. Blu-ray, ultra high definition Blu-ray, so that you don't confuse them.
Back there, Marty?
Since many productions use monitors as part of their sets, do you see any difference to how those monitors are used with HDR?
So for on-set monitors, it's a good question. I have not seen, certainly if the entire production is done and then you've got legacy or archive material, that would have to be dealt with so that you didn't have different contrast ratio on the onset monitor. What I have seen is not people dealing with that, but just upgrading to doing 4K for onset monitors and upconverting the non-graphic material. The graphic material would be natively 4K, and anything that video that's shot would be whatever it was, 1080i, 1080p, 720p, and then it would be played back on the 4K monitor and upconverted to the 4K monitor. That way it looks better on set. But as far as high dynamic range, no, I haven't seen anybody doing anything special for onset monitors to make them pop more for the onset monitor.
George Joblove came up with a great idea at the HPA Tech Retreat this year. He said that we are accustomed to dealing with a reference white level and a reference black level. And he said, as we're moving into HDR, we should junk both of those and just deal with a reference gray level. So pick 18% reflectance or whatever it is and do everything to that. And then whatever you got is going to work fine.
I have a question. It seems that many broadcasters have abandoned using high-end, high-quality professional displays and using consumer displays. Is that really a bad idea? If it is a bad idea, what should they be doing?
I can tell you why they're doing it.
Yeah, that's it.
Apologies to
for
some,
$300
but there's
you
not a
buy
lot of
whatever.
people that are going to spend $30,000 on a monitor these days. They just don't have the money for it.
There was a company at NAB, Pete knows who they are, but I won't mention their name. They were introducing an OLED broadcast monitor, and their price for it was ridiculous. It was something in the range of 65 grand or something like that. And then while the guy is talking to me, he says, we could probably make a processing box for a couple of grand, and then you could buy the consumer monitor for 5 or 6 grand. How would you feel about that?
Also, we're talking about the multi-viewer display in the production control room, the monitor wall.
That seems to be the default.
Much of the driving aspect has just been the adoption of multi-viewers, so that now you have 1 or 2 HDMI outputs that feed 64 pics on a monitor wall, you may still have, and oftentimes you still see, one or two really high-end QC monitors, maybe program preset, something like that. But even those are starting to fade away, and they're just becoming a pick within the multi-viewer. It's just a matter of cost, and then maybe in engineering there's one high-end. That's what I've seen.
And we're assuming we only own 2 reference monitors. That's it. We've only got 2. The director looks at crappy multi-viewers, and he deals with that because we don't want them looking at the image. We want the shader looking at it.
That's not unique by any means.
Anything else on that? Okay.
Well, it does depend on what the difference between the consumer monitor and the professional one is. So if it's something that's going to change your grayscale or change your colors or do something else that the director is going to be doing the wrong stuff, then that makes a difference. But if it's something that's going to have more lit pixels or dead pixels or scratches on it or something like that, no big deal.
One thing you got to keep in mind about consumer monitors, as I said earlier, the profit is very, very low in making them. And for consumer television, what they do as far as compatible signal formats, they run a pixel clock at 74.25 megahertz, which is 720p 60. And they just use multiples of that. So 1080p 60 is 148.5, 2160p 30 is 297, 2160p 60 is 594. For 2160p 24, they just increased the blanking interval. So it's not 4400, it's 5500 by 2250. And that's it. So the difference between that and say even a reference monitor to me should have a little bit more leeway as far as acceptable signal formats you can drive into it. Because as mentioned earlier, you want to be looking at a 4096 by 2160 signal. So that's one of the problems with the consumer TV. They make them as inexpensively as they can. And if your pixel clock isn't exactly falling within the tolerance of the TV, you can even have an issue with the source that's driving it. The other headache is the interface. As I said, the display interfaces just aren't fast enough yet. There are solutions out there, but it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. Manufacturers don't want to spend the money to upgrade the interfaces if they're having a hard enough time selling the televisions. So where that's all going to go, I can't tell you. The good news is that a lot of the displays that are coming out now are native 10-bit addressable panels now. They're not 8-bit panels anymore. So you can actually drive them at 10 bits, address them at 10 bits. So the newer high-end LCD TVs you see, the OLEDs, those are all using 10-bit panels.
I would also say in a practical situation, in the old days of CRTs, and I worked here in the Boston market, I would walk into the control room and not one of the monitors would match. That's not unique at WSBK, because I'd walk into BZ and I'd walk into CVB, and when they all had CRTs, you'd walk in and you'd see program preset wouldn't even match. Now we're talking about consumer displays that are being fed through a multi-viewer. The multi-viewer itself degrades because it's actually painting multiple pixels or pictures onto one monitor. So you're compressing and you're degrading the signal there. Don't worry about spending $60,000 on a monitor. Buy one QC monitor and have somebody with good eyes who can monitor that and deal with it. Quite frankly, I would not suspect that a director or a producer has the same eyes as somebody who can shade a camera, for example. Shading a camera is a specific, fairly challenging aspect, and people that are good at that have very good eyes. The director-producer is more concerned about creative things, not necessarily certain colorimetry. It's not to say that they don't have, capable eyes, but I'm thinking that they would trust the person shading the camera and not be that critical of the,
I have to
for-
object a little bit on that. I certainly would say, yeah, it's fine if somebody has an orange face or a green face, the director can live with that. But in that example that I showed of the woman in shadows coming out, the director is making a determination: is the woman too dark? Is she too light? Do we know that she's got a gun before we're supposed to know that she's got a gun? Those are important things, and the director's got to see that.
Well, why can't the director make that choice on a consumer-grade monitor and how it will be viewed by the audience?
You can, if the consumer grade monitor is good enough.
And if there was a way to calibrate it.
You know, one thing, and this hit me a couple of months ago. As we all know, if you buy television, the first time you turn it on, you can get a nice tan from it. Okay, they're all set to dynamic mode, which is basically just complete overdrive. It would be like turning your stereo up all the way and it's totally distorted, but it is loud. And I've been told the reason this has been done for years is the TV manufacturers don't know which set is going to be taken off a pallet, unpacked, and set up in a showroom. So they want theirs to be the brightest set. Okay, good practice, yes. Well, that people are attracted to the brightest TV, so nobody wants to be not the brightest TV. The calibrators all know this. There's the TV out of the box, then there's what it should look like. You go in there and you set it. Well, now we have high dynamic range. So if we have high dynamic range, and we have, say, an LCD TV that can do 1,000 nits small area, 800 nits large area, why do we need dynamic mode? It already is. If the TV can read the metadata, the TV ought to be able to set itself up and say, oh, here's where white is, here's where black is, here's where that middle gray is, here's the gamma curve, here's my color space. I shouldn't have to adjust anything on that television. Can we at last get rid of dynamic from the TV menus and all the user adjustments? I've posed this to Samsung. They said, well, you have to understand there's a whole other part of the company that completely works to undermine everything we do. You know, and so
It's called marketing.
we come out and we show these gorgeous looking high dynamic range sets with quantum dot backlights and everything. And yet, if you look in the menu, the consumer can still go in there and fiddle around with all these different adjustments, including things like black stretch. I don't want to see black. I want to see shadow detail. Dynamic gamma, you know, all these noise reduction things, which we would all tell people to turn off. But in theory, if we're providing all the metadata from a high dynamic range signal to the display, we shouldn't need any of that stuff. The TV now is bright enough to do dynamic and set everything in between. So I don't know if that's actually going to play out. I hope that it plays out, just as if I hope we'll get rid of 8-bit color once and for all. But maybe this is where we're headed now. Maybe we are actually heading to a display that won't really need to be calibrated. If the metadata is formatted correctly, the TV recognizes it correctly, and it has the dynamic range to show it, we shouldn't have to touch anything on the television. Maybe the backlight. Maybe that's the only thing you play with if you're watching at night or in the daytime, but everything else, you shouldn't have to touch it.
Just one more vote for a QC monitor in that monitors off the shelf, commodity monitors, etc. The home TV set, even if it's properly calibrated, is probably designed to cosmetically mask any kinds of artifacts that you would want to know exist, because then you can determine if it's something that you want to spend money to fix or address or at least be aware of. So I think that at least one QC monitor is a really good choice. And as for the rest of the monitors, well, everybody's using the commodity monitors with the multi-viewers and so on now anyway. So that's kind of a given.
I would also say, to your point though, of the monitor can set itself up. Not necessarily if there are 14 or 16 or 18 pictures going to that monitor through a multi-viewer, which is the case in a monitor wall.
I'm just thinking of a single image.
But that doesn't mean that the multi-viewer, and those of us that make multi-viewers, have to start considering, what are we going to do when we have a multi-image display? We're going to have to start taking in consideration the metadata that comes from the source. Mm-hmm. So it just moves it back in the process.
Any more on that? Marty, I have a question.
Thanks, Marty. Brad Richardson from Kramer. This goes to what Pete was just hitting on about the backlighting and so forth. So my question, I guess anybody who's dealing with HDR is, what about the ambient room sensors on these TVs? Most of them come with them turned on, all right? And I still think that in a lot of living rooms, they play an important role. Everybody has different sensitivities in terms of their reaction time. As people get older, their irises don't react as quickly as younger people. And so how does the ambient room sensor play a role in the future at television that's HDR spec?
This is where this equation that is stated in the ITU standard. I know 3 manufacturers are trying to make it. but that requires a sensing device that you can put somewhere in the vessel. That has to be very, very sensitive because the degrees of illumination in the room can be very gentle. I mean, it's not like in some cases you're going to open the curtains. Okay, that's easy to detect. But you're looking at the equation changes very linearly. 5 lux, 10 lux, 200 lux. Then it's not easy to make that sensor.
You may have 100 or 150 nit change between a night and a daytime
That's correct.
sensor.
That's correct.
And that's going to play havoc in the curve.
Yes, that's correct. That's something that we are investigating now.
And what if you have a lamp that has an opaque shade on it, and the light is hitting the sensor but not the screen,
Yes, exactly.
or vice versa?
Just screw up there.
Good discussion. Any more comments on that? Okay. Any questions? Then I have a question. As far as makeup, lighting, set design, we went through all the challenges of that. We went from SD to HD. What challenges do we face in this transition?
We're going to need 4 times as much makeup.
Valid response.
How do you foresee us metering lights in the future? Do you foresee us, for the most part, when lighting a scene using traditional f-stop meters or off the camera meting will be more effective for HDR? When we're lighting for HDR, how should we make sure that we're lighting it best?
Good question.
I don't think the lighting changes. HDR is giving you more speculars that you can deal with. And those speculars exist in the SDR, they're just being clipped.
So should we attempt to maintain our current contrast ratios? Could we widen those?
Whatever you're currently comfortable with is what you should be doing in the future, and let the HDR camera pick up more of what you're already doing.
Some things that have come out is with the new lighting, and I'm by no means a lighting expert, but with the new LED lighting, we're seeing much more consistent lighting from day to day and throughout the day, where things used to drift and change with temperature a lot more frequently. So the lighting has become more consistent, and the LED lighting is actually cooler to the environment. So unlike the days of when we went from SD to HD, everybody thought that because the light sensitivity of the camera is going down, because we were going with smaller pixels, that we thought the talent was going to be sweating to death under the lights. We don't have those issues today. The cameras are certainly light sensitive enough to handle 4K. HDR just gives them more dynamic range, and the lights themselves are much more consistent than they used to be. So life should be a little bit easier in that perspective.
Comments on that? We have a question?
You're giving it to me. I wonder if you can speak to the current state of cinema exhibition and what you see the future being when it comes to incorporating these new technologies. Ang Lee just did his demo at the Future Cinema Conference, and high frame rate was his, I think, big thing. High pixel count and high frame rate was his big thing, but we've got color gamut, we've got high dynamic range. And a corollary to that is the aspect ratio issue in theaters changed dramatically when we moved up. Let's say it was Avatar, perhaps. When we moved to digital cinema, the scope format white screens with side masking kind of went away, and we got big 185 screens without masking. The Univisium proposal of a 2.0 to 1 aspect ratio has been discussed, and Jurassic World used it, and House of Cards is using it. Where do you see, now scope content is a smaller image than flat content, and you've got edits, jump cutting to fill the screen for moments in height for things that are ordinarily a scope. Where do you see all that settling in terms of the...
I got to NAB too late to get to the Ang Lee demo, but I heard from a number of people who were there that Ang Lee and his editor were frantically taking notes while it was happening. Not about the reactions of the people, but it was the first time they had seen it in the way that they had hoped that people would see it. I doubt that more than a handful of venues will be able to show it the way that he wants to have it seen. And so he's going to have to make something that's going to work.
They asked the question, how many places are capable of showing it, and the answer was 0.
Yeah.
Right. But high frame rate is still an issue. That's not an unknown. He just pushed it a bit, and he did it in 3D and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But
there's something that's
there's a
going to
lot
come
going
out
on
that
there. The Dolby Vision and IMAX twin lasers and all. There's a lot going on in cinema exhibition, and it seemed like we blinked. And you go into cinema now, and it's completely different than it was 10 years ago. And it's not just the digital aspect. I'm talking about just the presentation of the art in exhibition. Where do you see it going?
Well, there's something I can't fully reveal because it hasn't come out yet. But let me just say that as far as high frame rate is concerned, the concern that people have about 60 frames looking like video and 24 looking like film may not be the case when you go well beyond 60. And something is supposed to come out about that maybe later this year.
Good to know. We'll keep our eyes open for that. When does the resolution arms race end, and why?
Never.
We have a never? Anyone else? Okay.
It's very easy to make large displays with lots of pixels in them. The incremental cost to make a 4K 55 over a 1080p model is almost dropped to 0, which is why a lot of them are switching to 4K. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's a 5K computer monitor that HP sells, the Z27Q, if either people have it. I've seen prototypes of 6K monitors. There are 8K displays. You saw several of them up on the screen there, although most of them are using one or the other panel. And there is a Chinese group, and it may be TCL, working on a 10K display. So at some point, you do want to have a referee go in, throw a flag, and say, guys, I'm going to give you a penalty for just being silly. I mean, at one point, but somebody might turn right around and say, well, look at the big layered wall. Maybe there's a market in the future for something that big, so we have to have a very fine pixel pitch. So we need to have maybe 10 or 12K resolution. By the way, the pixel pitch in that layered monitor is the same pitch that was in that 50-inch 720p display from 1995, 20 years ago.
1.2 millimeter.
Yep, show you how far we've come. So there is no end to it. And even I think it's nuts, but, and as somebody pointed out much earlier, what's the average distance that somebody sits at home from a television?
And when are we walking into a theater and looking at that?
Right.
Recognition.
And why are we
That's a
making,
baited question, but nobody
why are
can beat it.
TV manufacturers making 43-inch 4K displays? TVs for home use. Why? Well, because they can. And somebody will say, hey, I was going to buy a 42-inch full HD. I'll buy a 4K set now, and I'll sit 15 feet away from it. And I'll never know the difference. But I bought a 4K TV.
I think a separate discussion could be displays, because displays could be used for multiple things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, multiple images on one display or something like that. That's a different discussion. When you look at broadcast stations, sports venues that have their own in-house production, going back several years, you had customers who thought about a 7 to 10 year return on investment period. That has shrunk down to 5 to 7, except if you talk about sports venues, because all of the sports venues are based on a 10-year return on investment, mainly because Mitsubishi and Daktronics said you only have to refresh the screens every 10 years. So they also thought that means you only have to refresh the control room every 10 years, which is not correct. Cameras, replay devices, production switchers, you're really in a 5 to 7, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter turnaround time on where the technology changes enough that you'd be looking to refresh your cameras or things like that. Sports trucks. Hugo and I do a lot of work with sports trucks, and quite frankly, Game Creek's not looking to roll a truck, turn it over every 3 years. And based on the introduction of 4K and then NHK's touting that they're going to do 8K productions in 2020, that's a 4-year period. There's no way that Pat Sullivan is going to be rolling, all of his trucks over every 4 years. He can't afford to. There's no return on investment. So I think that the limiting factor is how quickly can the creative side change to the next format. 8K, if 16K came out 2 years after 8K, do you think anybody could afford to say, well, I'll find another market for the cameras I just bought and buy new cameras? I do think that as manufacturers, we're going to have to start looking at more things that are upgradable to support different formats, but that's easier said than done. In a camera, you've got a sensor. There's almost no way to get around what the sensor can do. In a server, you've got bandwidth coming into the server and the physical I/O connections. Those aren't things that you can design around that easily. Even in production switchers, people are looking at existing switchers today that do 1080i and 1080p, and they're using multiple MEs, 4 of them, to get to 4K. Are they going to use 16 MEs to get to 8K? I don't think so. So you're going to have a faster processor in the MixFX bus that can handle 4K natively or 8K natively, and then upgrading that to the next generation. I think that's going to be the limiting factor. How fast can a manufacturer design and implement new equipment, and how fast can the creative people afford to do the return on investment that they can actually spend the money? I think there will be a limiting factor.
One place where we do need an improvement in resolution, as I mentioned earlier, is near-to-eye displays. I looked at a lot of the Oculus headsets and other headsets. The resolution is still too coarse for my liking. Those of you remember the first LCD projectors came out, we had a phrase we used, the screen door effect. You're watching pictures like you're looking through a screen door. Well, 20 years later, we're back to that point again. With VR headsets, we're looking at images through a screen door. So we need a much greater pixel density than what we have now in near-to-eye displays to really make it virtual reality so that you don't notice the display itself. Right now, the display artifact, the actual physical construction, intrudes on the VR experience. Is 4K enough per eye? It might not be. We might need to go to something like 6, 7, 8K per eye to really make it work. And that's an incredible pixel density to have in such a small display. So there, I don't think that's going to slow down at all. I think you're going to see some improvements made to really stop drawing attention to the display at all. So what you see basically a pixel-free surface, or one with a minimal amount of pixels built into the structure. The larger displays, its viewing distance, screen size. I didn't really think that many people would want to go out and buy a 65-inch or an 80-inch TV, but they're doing it. So, then you have to go to higher pixel density so that you don't see the pixel structure. But it's not going to stop, trust me.
I have a question. As far as light compression, 4:1, for example, to make a signal fit into a 10 gig infrastructure, is that something to embrace, avoid, and is there a right place and a wrong place to implement that?
Well, it's always an issue of cost. So I think that today the value of light compression we talked about earlier is that it allows you to do things like UHD1 within the 10 gig limit of most of the IP equipment that's easily available, reasonably costed today. And as we move to 25 gig, I think at that point it'll still be an issue of, is there a savings? Is there enough reason that we get that much value out of using light compression, even though we will now be able to do 2 streams of UHD simultaneously within one port? So I think that compression exists today because it saves tremendous amount of money in terms of things like storage. And so you're really talking about compression in the mezzanine in the production environment itself. And on one hand, purists would say there should be no compression, but we've introduced compression into many, many places. So I think that the idea that it maybe goes away is a fallacy. I think it will be a choice. And for today, there's certainly a tremendous value to using it. So, and it's visually lossless. That's not the same as mathematically lossless. But I think for television production, that's acceptable, in my opinion.
Without the use of our low latency video coding, we couldn't have made our 4K truck IP. We need that because the commodity infrastructure now is 10 gigabit.
Affordable.
Very affordable, very affordable. Also, the back of the video switcher servers is very, very simple to use. It's extremely low latency, very easy to decode, and the hardware is very inexpensive.
In the case of your truck, 4 cables, you couldn't put it on the road. If you put in 4 times the cables, the truck wouldn't go on the road. Trucks roll off the dock at about 97% of their total weight.
There have been trucks without IP, but we can reduce 85% of the weight of the cabling using IP.
Yeah.
It's major.
Question?
Yes.
Zach Moore, ESPN. What is the latency in that compression, the light compression you just mentioned?
5 milliseconds.
5 milliseconds.
Don't forget, we're talking about now compressing even the display interface signal, which is going to enable viewing of high-resolution content. That 8K, in all likelihood, will require display stream compression to get it from whatever the video card is that's driving the display to the display, just to get it through the interface. And that's 2-to-1, 3-to-1 max compression, very, very low latency. So all parts of the signal chain will now be compressed.
It makes, regarding HDR and SDR, it makes sense that you would certainly want to shoot one film. But it occurs to me that there might be times that you would shoot differently if you were optimizing for HDR as opposed to SDR. For example, you might, if you're doing if you're optimizing for HDR, you might shoot with a lot more in shadow, a lot more detail, like very subtle detail on a person's face in shadow. I'm just curious if anybody has comments on that overall question about whether you can always optimize for both simultaneously.
Same issue we had with SD and HD. Theoretically, HD would require less cutting and wider shots, but as a practical matter, if you're going to deal with SD, then you have to have more cutting and more close-ups. Theoretically, you would do something completely different for a handheld device as you would do for a cinema screen, but people are watching movies
Bigger
on their
bullet holes.
Yeah,
than people were talking.
exactly. I remember 24 Conspiracy. 24 was a series that Fox had for a while on TV, and they came up with a mobile version of it that was called 24 Conspiracy, with gigantic bullet holes, much more blood, much louder sound effects, and each mobisode, as they called them, was initially 1 minute long, and then they thought they could maybe get it up to 3 minutes.
What I see in my travels, some companies are saying, we're going to get some IT people to come in to deal with the backbone, the heavy iron, and we'll groom and we'll train our old video fossils to move into the future. Other places I go, it seems like as soon as they need to cut back, they get rid of the video fossils and say, we don't need these people anymore. And of course, they run into the problem of legacy issues, which they will have for years. Does the panel have any suggestions on the proper way to make this transition? How to get the staff that you need to get the job
keep
done?
the video fossils as long as you possibly can.
Yes. We're all part of that.
Because what I have seen is they bring in the IT people. My son is an IT security expert. He does not work weekends, does not put in 18-hour days. He's not in lockdown for big events. IT people go in and say, this broadcast is not for me. I want to have a life again. So the talent that they groomed, IT people understand video, leave.
I mean, obviously a suggestion would be for the fossils like ourselves, right? We all need to embrace IT and become as savvy as possible. I know that within our company, our parent company bought a company called Tripwire, and one of the presentations that they gave us was talking about IT security. And as we start talking about IP signals, and I know we're talking from a camera to a router to a switcher to a replay, those are pretty much tied up safe networks. They're isolated networks. But more and more, people are actually paying things like ransomware to get their computers unlocked. Where you actually get a note on your computer that says, you can't access any of your files unless you pay us a fee. It's criminal activity, but you actually go to a website and pay a fee and it'll unlock your computer. There have been networks that have been taken off the air because of lack of security. And so IT security, which means we need to know about IT much more deeply, is very important.
Good point.
I teach classes. I've been teaching a class for a while at Infocom on AV/IP and how they converged. And it's my argument that it's easier for somebody working in broadcast video, AV, and everything to learn the IT necessary to make this transition than it is for an IT person, because in our industry, just by the nature of it, there's aesthetics involved with it. There are artistic decisions we make. There are things we have to understand that go way, way beyond the IT world. So to kind of drum that knowledge out and say, everything's IT, you don't need those people anymore, that's a big mistake, a really, really big mistake. So the point of the class is to say to people, you can learn this, you can do it, you'll learn how to ride a bicycle, you can learn the basics, you don't have to be a wizard at this, but you can learn the basics of this and master it, and now you have that a lifetime of accumulated skills with everything else you do, cameras and lighting and sound and audio processing, editing, distribution and all, that it would take an IT person their entire life to learn. And the big problem is, convincing the powers that be that there's still value in that. But the IT part is not that difficult to learn, at least what you need to know as a media professional, which is really what we are. And once we get really deep into it, there are people that can take care of that. There are people can handle it, security issues and everything. But knowing how to take a signal, compress it, transmit it over an IP network, get it out at the other end, have it look good, have the audio be in sync, reduce the latency and everything, can't help it. There's creative and aesthetic decisions that play into that your experience in this industry are very important. They're integral to you making that decision. You can't teach an IT person that overnight. They can't learn it. It would take them years to learn it, and they may not even have the aptitude for it.
And they leave.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left. I'd like to shift gears, give everybody some time to think about it. 150 words or less, what advice would you like to close the evening with? I'll start. Give you guys some time to think about it. As far as test and measurement is concerned, this is the best thing that's happened to our business. To be honest with you, folks, there's more things to test, more problems, more conversions, more problems. So it's the best news that I've heard in a while. And NAB was fun this year with all the people saying, what do I need to buy? Who's next? Anyone? Any fatherly advice to close the evening?
Wait till next April to buy your 4K TV.
Stay. Anyone else?
Except for ratings, numbers don't matter.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would say that if you're thinking about doing an upgrade or looking for something at your facility, work with the experts. There's plenty of vendors here on the panel. Give us a call. Doesn't mean you have to buy from us. You can make your choice based on the right product for the right solution. Talk to some of the systems integrators. Talk to the consultants that you can find. There are plenty of people out there that can give you a vast amount of advice. Not everybody's advice is perfect, and you'll find differing opinions. But between all of the advice that you can get, you can make as informed a decision as possible. So use the people here on this panel, use the people that you work with, your local systems integrators, your local consultants, and pick their brain as much as you can. At the end of the day, the more informed you are, the better you can make a decision. And it doesn't mean you have to jump in, feet first and, okay, I'm going to rip out everything and go all IP. There might be transitional ways to get there and things like that.
Hugo?
From a personal experience inside Sony, the broadcasting has become a commodity and the competition is very fierce. Then all the technologies in HD are just plateauing. The transition to 4K has been phenomenal for us. The last 4 years, both in the cinematographic world and live sports, has been mind-boggling. It's a very, very beneficial for us as a business. And now the transition with IP is also helping us tremendously. Then HDR is another tool. Hopefully, will be incorporated into this. But right now, IP and 4K is very, very positive for us.
I would say that, I agree 4K is very real today in terms of as a production environment, being able to produce it. I would say that all the vendors really do support ways that they can indicate, here's how you go into the future. That SDI equipment, it's quite possible to integrate that into an IP workflow or to take IP solutions and be able to build SDI solutions into those as well. But even looking back at HD SDI, I would say 1080p is a tremendous format as a springboard because it allows us to get with Quad HD SDI into 4K, and that it's digital, it's high definition, it's got broad resolution, and it's progressive format. So I personally have always felt like 1080p is a really good place working from. And moving into 4K, moving into IP, and then even potentially beyond 8K, if you will, it's quite a straightforward path. So it's not something to be scared of at all. HDR sounds a little bit more iffy at the moment, but it's very important to broadcasters. I think it really sounds like more and more that HDR is going to be the secret sauce that makes 4K really exciting for us as viewers, much like widescreen made HD exciting for us when we moved into 720p and 1080i.
Thank you. Paul, any closing comments?
Well, it's kind of interesting. We're in a time where we're moving away from having a clear convergence on a standard. I mean, all of us can remember a time when there was one TV standard that we dealt with primarily, say, in North America. So today, or let's go forward 5 years, what resolution, what bit depth, what color space, what dynamic range will be used is going to be a broad array. It's going to be a tool set as opposed to a simple thing to converge down to. So it opens, I think, both opportunity as well as a hugely scary chance for things to go wild. And I mean, we've all seen productions go really bad trying to use new technologies. At the same time, there's a very interesting thing happening, and that's we're throwing away better equipment than ever. So when we went from SD to HD, we threw away some real crap. And as time goes by, the amortization period is getting slower and getting smaller, and the equipment we're leaving behind is getting better and better and better. And maybe you remember the early days of HD and using ENG equipment that was consumer equipment, pretty dodgy. Today it's a different story. Consumer equipment is pretty darn fine in many cases for many applications. So we're moving away from something simple to understand, which is a single set of standards and formats, to a wide tool set. And at the same time, we're evolving through equipment very rapidly. So it's pretty exciting times, and I'm actually not sure where it ends. I don't think we ever converge again on a single standard. I think we converge on a space of creative tools.
Well,
And donate all of your CRT monitors to your local opera company. Because the latency in more modern monitors makes them useless as conductor monitors for the singers to look at.
What I'd like to say is I appreciate you spending the day here today, whatever part of the day you could spend, because what you're doing is you're staying current. The way things are moving, as quickly as they're moving, either you're spending a part of your day every day staying current or becoming obsolete by the day. So keep it up, and thank you for making this happen here today, Marty. We appreciate your support.
I want to thank each and every one of you for donating so much time to this. I really appreciate it. A lot of you have come a long way, and I hope that also the video that we're doing today gets widely disseminated through SMPTE, because there's a lot of valuable information there that I'd like to see get out. One other thing, we will have a June meeting. It's being planned now. Watch your email. It'll be largely social, but it will also have a topic, and I hope you can make it. And I want to thank all of you for turning out as well. Thank you.